Now some people really do want to build their own of these, so this is a video which will attempt to explain how to construct it. Unfortunately I've already just started, so I'll go through what I've done so far. If we look at this bottom panel, you can see it's actually 2 layers glued together, and the reason for this is the inspection hatches then go into these holes, screw into these little holes here, and also you'll see that when the side panels are glued on, there's like a ridge that they glue into, which acts as a guide all the way around, you see. So you've got to glue this panel to the one underneath and make sure that they're lined up correctly. Now one way to line them up is actually to put the hatch panels in here and here, and just put a screw in there and there and there and there, and then when you put this panel over the top, because they screw into this under panel, when you put this top panel on, the hatches will locate it in the right place. Put a ring of clothes pegs or clamps all around the edge, wait for the glue to set, and then take the hatch panels off, and you'll be left with the 2 layers glued together in the perfect orientation. So that's how I would do it. Right, so then you glue on this panel. This has got the hole for the battery tube to go through. You'll notice it can only go on one way up because there's this notch here. Okay, I actually have these little wedges. This angle is 90 degrees, and when they're gluing, I put the glue on, I wedge these in, I put a big blob of blue tack just there, and I leave it. It just ensures that this panel is vertical once the glue's set, otherwise nothing's going to match up properly. Same applies to this one, you see, it's vertical, and then that one go that way while it's setting, and that one I have to put in a bit of an angle. Really I should make a smaller one of these. Anyway, that's how I do it. You'll notice this one is made of 2 layers which are glued together. You have the hole on this side because the back end of that tube feeds in through here, is going to rest in that little socket there. So don't glue that on facing the wrong way. Other than that, it can only go in one way because there's 2 projections here which go into slots. When you glue it, just wipe the glue away here and here, because when the side panels go on, otherwise it'll push the side panel out. It's easier to just wipe the glue away with your thumb before it sets. You've got this rear one, again it can only go in one way because of the notch there, and that leaves you with this one. This is made in 2 layers which are glued together before you glue it down. So I'm just showing you how they go. And you can see you need the 2 layers because of the guitar tuner, which goes all the way through, and then this bolt, kind of bolt thing, goes in there, and you can see there's a tiny screw there which also holds it. This hole is for one of these standard bearings. It was designed for it to go on that way, but it actually is a lot easier to assemble if you fit it that way. Okay, and I used taper head screws. Show you these. There's a taper there. That's useful because as you screw it into place, it kind of aligns it into the position it should be in. Same applies to this one, we'll come to that later. Okay, so you've got the guitar tuner in. I'll just show you one of those if I've got any spare ones. I have somewhere. Each guitar tuner comes like that. So you push it through the hole, then you put the washer over there, then this piece goes into the hole and you tighten it up pretty tight and it grips it into place, and then you've got the little securing screw here which goes through there. just remember when you buy guitar tuners, if you're building this yourself, not from a kit or anything, they come, if you buy 6, you'll get 3 that way and you'll get 3 the other way, where this tab comes out this side, and they're no good. So you want the ones that look like that. It doesn't matter if they're silver or gold or anything else, but they've got to look basically like that in terms of layout. Right, I am just focusing on the woodwork at the moment, so let's look at the top. You need to prepare the top. So the first thing is take this panel, ignore this, and on the underside you can see I've glued these 2 strips, and they're there again so that when you glue the sides on, there's something to put for them to sort of fit into and hold them into the correct shape. So glue these on first. There are lines etched into this main panel that show you where to glue these side pieces. You can almost see part of one there. So glue them in. Again, clothes pegs or clamps like this. These came from a pound shop. I actually bought like literally 100 of them. Just these spring plastic clamps. These work great all the way along there. So if you ever go in a pound shop, you see a load of those, just buy them. Come in packs of 4 for £1, something like that. Then when you've done that, turn it over. Glue this on. Now this is made in 4 pieces. You could pre-assemble it, then glue it down. But what I do is, I put this end piece in, glue that in, there's a tab there. Then I glue this piece in, I put glue along the bottom. I put it in an angle and then fold it in. So these then engage here. I do the same with that one. I put glue along the bottom, I put the slots into the tabs, into the slots. Because the holes are slightly loose, and then I just bend it, fold it in, and then these parts engage. Then I put a clamp across there, that way, wipe off any excess glue. Then this one goes in from the end, that way, you can see. Notice this hole, bottom side, not up here, down there. Otherwise the back of the socket's going to foul the keys. So down there at the bottom. You don't want to put that in the wrong way up. It's potentially possible to put it in the wrong way up, which is why I'm telling you. Put it in like that. I actually put some 3mm thick spare slices of wood, like just slivers of wood, like this, under here and under there, because remember you've got this raised edge here, to make it all the same height. Then put it on the deck, like that, and then I put a couple of thick books on here to just gently press down. With clamps there and clamps there, and I have another clamp like that there, okay, facing upwards. And for that I use these sorts of clamps which you can get from DIY stores. They're not, I mean, they're not brilliantly well made, but we're not clamping them really tight either, and you can just adjust them up like that, facing upwards. One there that way, or one like that, and one like that there. That's how I do it. And then a couple of books on top of there. I'll just let the glue dry. What glue do I use? I use Titebond. Okay, this works fine, dries fairly quickly, and also if you make a mistake, if you use a hairdryer on maximum heat and a lot of patience, you can weaken it and take the parts apart. It's difficult, but you can do it. There's also a version of Titebond which comes in a blue kind of themed bottle. That's the same as this, but it sets faster if you're in a hurry. So basically assemble your top and assemble your bottom like that. Right, the next thing is going to assemble the crank axle, the 2 bearings, the drum brakey system into this part before we glue the top on, because I found it's actually, you can do it when it's fully assembled through the hatches. It's just easier this way. So how does that work? Right, well, these are brake mechanisms from small children's electric scooters. Basically a cable goes to there, and when the cable is pulled you can see it draws in this brake band, squeezing onto this drum. Okay, so we don't need all this, we just need the band and the drum. So there's the band, there's the drum. So you'll be pleased to know I've dismantled this for you. Takes a bit of cutting as well to end up with these parts. So what have I done here? I've basically taken the drum from the brake system and it's got to fit onto this axle. There's the crank handle. So I need some sort of adapter because it's not an electric scooter. So this is a 3D printed adapter which is glued in, and it is an absolute exact fit. This is about version 15 of the design, so it looks pretty simple, but you can see it's perfect within fractions of a millimeter. We don't want this to wobble as it goes around, so it needs to be right. I've also got this flange part. This allows me to bolt that to there and then slide this onto the shaft, and then with these little grub screws which go into these holes, there they are, you can tighten it onto the shaft in any position you want. Now I'd advise, if you're building one of these, to buy a set of metric hex key screwdrivers. So you get them in sets of 4. They're quite cheap on eBay or Amazon. 3mm, what do we got, 1.5, where are my others, 2 is one of the commoner ones that we use, and then occasionally you'll need the other one, which is lost over here. Here we are, 2.5. Also you'll need some other type of glue. This glue is pretty good. It's kind of cross between model aircraft glue, like plastic glue, and a kind of rubberized glue. It sticks most things basically, so just a general purpose glue like that is handy to have. So what have we got? I've got to fix that to there, and I've got to do some modifications on this before we can fit it into here. Right, these are M4 bolts. That's 4mm in diameter bolts. They screw straight into the plastic. The holes in the plastic have been made a tiny bit undersized, so you just screw them straight in. I've done them up nearly all the way. I've not quite tightened them yet, and the reason is I'm going to slide this onto this 8mm diameter shaft, precision ground, before I tighten them up, just to make sure everything's dead centered. There, so I've just pushed it on a little bit, and now I'm going to tighten these up. Okay, so I've done these bolts up tight. The other thing you find is if there's a tiny bit of wibble side to side as it rotates, only a small amount, you can, if you vary how tightly you do these up, you can actually compensate for it by trial and error, a bit like balancing a bicycle wheel, the way they tighten the spokes up till it's absolutely perfect. You can only get a small amount like that, but it can be done because I've done it. But the best thing is to have the 3D printed insert so beautifully made that it's an absolutely perfect fit, you see. So I've just put these grub screws in loosely for now, using the 2mm hex screwdriver, and then we'll put that to one side. We don't need it for a while. So the next thing I'm going to do is start playing around with this. This goes in like that. There's a 3D printed piece that will hold it here, and then this has a small spring, and attached to the spring is some thread, and the thread goes through the tensioner. And you could say, why is there a spring? The spring is there so that if this, as it rotates, moves even a fraction of a millimeter off center, it just damps it out. So when you're cranking, you can't really feel any, it feels constant and smooth. So I'll show you how this is done now. Here's the spring. Okay, it has to be a specific size, too long, and as you tension it, you hit it, you bang into this. Too short, there's not enough springiness. Too thin a wire, it's too stretchy. Too thick a wire, and it's not stretchy enough. So this is actually 0.6mm thick wire. The diameter of the spring is nominally 5mm, and the whole thing, including the loops on the end, is about 15mm long. So if you were to buy that spring, that's what you would specify. And in fact, the only way I can find to buy them, unless you buy a whole boxed set, is to get them from China, which is fine because I'm ordering a whole load of them at a time. So we've got our spring. Now we've got to fit our spring into here somehow. So we need something that goes across, and we also, you see, need to widen out that loop. So the bit that goes across is a piece of not quite sure what, is that 6 maybe, pneumatic pipe fitting, push fit. I cut a piece off and then I cut a slit out of the side, so it's like a C shape, like a what's it called? Is it a dowel pin? I can't remember. No, is it cotter pin? What's the one that's C shaped like that and you hammer it through a hole? One of those, but made of plastic. Right, so you can see I've cut a length off. I cut a slit down the side with some very sharp scissors. That will go across through there and through the loop in the end of the spring, but first I've got to open out the loop of the end of the spring, and to do that I actually use these surgical instruments, which are ideal for the job actually. At this point I put on my 3x magnifying glasses as well, so I can see what I'm doing. You see I'm slowly opening out this loop till it will fit around that. Right, so you can see I've opened out the loop just enough to push the pin through that I made with the plastic tube. Then I've tied to the other end a piece of badminton racket string. I think this is 0.7mm, I think, in diameter. It's not crucial, as long as it's reasonably soft, so it goes around this when you wind it on. And there's about a 6-inch length sticking off here. So now this has to be mounted here, so there has to be some sort of thing here that holds that, and that's what this piece is. So the first thing we're going to do here is, you've got a hexagonal hole here, you see, which will accept a nut. This is an M5, I think it is, nut, which goes in there. And the easiest way to do that, and I'm not sure I can film it with one hand, but I'm going to have a go. Here we are. Is you take a long bolt, the one from the crank knob, which is the same thread, put it through there, right, put the nut onto the end of it, about 3 turns like that, then hang on, try and get it into shot, push it into there with the flat face here, then give it a good shove. It should, try not to break the 3D print. Yeah, that pushes the nut into place. Then unscrew the bolt, right, and keep the bolt keep the bolt in the cupboard, because the bolt you're going to use is this one, which will go through there and into there and hold it all in place. So we'll put the big one back for later, because that's for the crank handle. Right, now take this with this sort of sloping piece uppermost, wedge it in here, hang on, there, like that, don't know if you can see that, then slide it up, which I can't do with one hand. So I'm going to put it down, I'm going to slide it up with 2 hands there, like that. Right, if you can see that. Then just wedging my camera into position, there we are. Then take that bolt, take your brake drum, brake shoe as it were, and thread that through there, whoops, and it'll go into the captive screw. And then I'm actually going to cheat, I should use an Allen key, I'm just going to do it this way, tighten it up moderately. Obviously if you go too tight nothing will move anymore and you'll snap the print, 3D print, so just moderately tight there. Now you can see how this works. So this will get pulled down by the by the tensioner, and it will grip the brake drum. because that thread's going to go through there. So this is how it works, and then the shaft goes through there, and the brake drum will be there like that, and it will all be marvellous. And on the end of the axle we have the optical wheel, which I'll come to later. Now the crank handle is welded, TIG welded to the end of this precision rod, and you can tell it's precision rod because somewhere on it actually says it's precision ground. However, these bearings, this is 8mm, the bearings are 8mm, so they should be a perfect fit and the bearings should just slide on, you see. But actually that's not what happens. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have to undo these grub screws without losing them, put them safe somewhere, then take a file like this and file the inside here like crazy. Just keep going until it slides on. Sometimes they're really tight. It's actually really annoying because it slows down my build, because you'll see there's a bearing there and there's a bearing there which I've already slid on, which will bolt in here. So our crank will go through there like that, through the drum brake, through the bearing. On the end of the crank will fit the optical chopper wheel. So with some emery sanding of the shaft and filing of the inside of the bearing, each of these I've got them to slide on, okay, and they're in the right position. So now jam it between your legs is the easiest way. Line these up, line up the holes and put these little screws in, and because they're tapered they'll self-center. Don't over tighten them, otherwise they'll strip out of the wood. On that end, and then we'll do the same this end, and for those I use these screws, which are longer than they need to be, but they match the screws that I'm using for the strap attachment pins and a few other things, so they all look the same. So if you were tightening this up, if you were tightening this grub screw up with the whole thing assembled, so you'd be doing it through this rear hatch, you'd have to do it with one of these L-shaped keys, which is fine, it's just more fiddly, which is why I prefer to assemble this at this stage. You don't have to do it this way. So the next thing I'm going to do is thread this through the here, tighten it up and move this in and out, and check when I spin it with my finger that it's all working right and we're getting just a little bit of friction there. It's not rubbing on the wood or anything. Right, this is a little bit tricky to get right. The ideal position for the drum I found is when the pad is pushed up against the wood like that, so push it that way, there should be a tiny bit of drum showing this side. But if you move it out too far, it hits this and starts rubbing on it. So I'm actually going to just file a tiny bit off this 3D print. The next generation of prints will have this already modified so it won't do this. Now the best way to move this is to grab this and just wiggle it back and forth, as with my little finger here I push. You see in it, you can just move it a mil or two each way. So I'm just bringing it out a bit, push that back to there. Have a look at this edge. I'd like to come out a bit more, ideally. Push that back. Yeah, let's come out a bit more. And maybe a touch more. About there. See, there's just the tiniest. I've pushed this against the wood all the way around. There's a tiny bit sticking out this side. And I'm not quite, I mean there's fractions of a mil in it, but I'm not rubbing on this black 3D print now. Right, so I did tune this. Some of these are tighter than others to get this just to have almost minimal lateral movement. So you can see that's pretty good. And the main thing is the sensation on this finger is constant resistance to turning. It shouldn't be lumpy, it shouldn't sort of go tight, loose, that's no good. It's got to be consistent all the way. So you can see how the spring's just doing its job. there is a tiny bit of movement here, and it's just been taken up by the spring. So that feels good. And you'll notice I've wound it. Obviously you want this parallel with the center of the drum. You don't want it going off at an angle that way or that way. This way's better because if you're pulling this brake pad inward that way, it can't go any further. Once it's rubbing against the wood, it can't go any further that way. The worst situation would be if you had this wound out this way, so it was diagonal that way. It'd be kind of pulling it off the edge of the drum all the time. So it's better to have it pulled that way up against the wood, and then it stays in the correct position relative to the drum. See, it's absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do now it's all lovely, is put a dab of glue there to stop that knot coming undone one day, and also a dab of glue there just in case this ever wanted to kind of come loose. Right, top panel. What have we got to do? We've got to fit a DIN socket here. We've got to fit a button here, a potentiometer and its knob here, and also on this batch of laser cuts, because I'm using those black guitar tuners, there's slight variation between different makes. I'm actually going to have to file a tiny bit here, otherwise the shaft of it rubs the wood. This is the DIN socket. It's got 5 connectors on the back. We're not using that one, and we're not using that one, so I've bent them out of the way. We're using these 3, which it's very easy to short them out actually, so I've just bent them out a tiny bit because my wires are going to come from this way and then go there, there and there and be soldered in. So this goes in that way, and then there are some M3 bolts that go through with shallow domed heads. If you don't use the shallow domed heads, if you plug something in, sometimes it can hit the heads of the bolts and not go all the way into the socket. Next thing we've got is one of these gaming buttons. They're not the knockoffs, these are the real ones. They've got a real nice action. Notice part of it's exposed. So if you're getting creative with the glue gun later on, keeping all your wires tidy, just make sure you do not get glue on this piece or that piece, otherwise the button won't move anymore. That could just push fits into there. It's a snap fit. These wings spring in. So here what have we got? I've filed this hole just a little bit, which is necessary for those black, they're Fender guitar tuners I was using. The knob has snapped into place, the push button. The potentiometer here, 10k, is installed. You'll notice which way these connectors go. They point that way. Yeah, I'll show you why in a minute. And it goes through the wood. It also goes through this laser cut acrylic disc. You might ask why the laser cut acrylic disc. The reason is it looks nice. So turn it all the way that way. Then you've got your knob with the pointer. Push that on with the pointer facing down there. Okay. And don't push it on till it rubs the acrylic. Push it on until there's about a 0.5 millimeter gap. It should stop at that point anyway, but I'm just saying. Now when you turn it all the way, the pointer goes to there, and when you turn it back all the way, the pointer goes to there, and then when it's in the middle, that's roughly the ideal buzz position, plus or minus a little bit of adjustment. So you see, thought has been applied to this. It stops your fingers rubbing the wood when you turn it, and it just looks nicer than having a big bare expanse of ply, even though this is lovely smooth ply. And then this is bolted in with our low profile domed head M3 bolts. And you could say, why don't you just screw it in? Well, the reason is, if you plug something into this and it happens to be a bit of a tight fit, and you're pulling it, you'll probably rip the screw out. This is only 3mm thick ply, so just to be safe, I've used little nuts and bolts to do that. The reason these point this way is because the cable will come around here, and if you look at this, I hold it like that, you'll see that the cable will then run through this notch, which has been thoughtfully provided for you, which kind of holds the cable run in place without it just flapping around inside the sound box. So that's why these face this way. Right, what else have we got to do? Well, you've got the optical wheel, which is a push fit on here. He said with one hand. Anyway, it's a push fit on there. Once it's in the correct position, you put a dab of glue on it. I mean, it will stay on its own, to be honest. And then that runs through this sensor here, which is shining a light through it. And this sensor is mounted onto this piece, like that. Like that. And it's kind of screwed up onto the top lid. But the bottom line is that this then shines through the wheel. Okay? But I think I'll come back to that later, to be honest. So the next thing to do is put all this to the one side and then build up the printed circuit board. So here's the bare board, and we've got to, what have we got to do with this? Well, we've got to solder micro switches all the way along here, solder on 2 rows of female headers, and the teensy board will fit into there. And then there's a few runs of wire which come off these solder holes here, and also some little buttons. You remember this, the little buttons? Solder on to those locations there. So that's the next thing to do, and then we'll come back and do a grand final assembly. First thing I'm going to do is put micro switches into these holes here. So I'll just change my glasses to my magnifying ones. Start with the lower row first. I'll show you why in a minute. Blob on each end, and with practice you can get it just right. It'll hold them all down. Now if I check all these, you can see they're all in place. None of them are at an angle, so that's all good. Okay. So then I flip it over like this, find my solder, where it's gone, there we are. And then I start soldering them, and then we do exactly the same thing with the top row. So okay, it's pretty good. Right, next thing, 2 40-pin female headers, and I've got some pre-assembled 40 pins female, 40 pins male. Put them in. Now, teensy board. Teensy 4.1. Make sure the socket faces that way. Okay, and what I do is I tend to just hold this in place with some blue tack. And off we go again. Right, so I've done that, done the underside. So the next thing is on the rear side, we've got locations for these switches. Apart from this one, which isn't used anymore, this board is due for a revision soon. So you see these switches, they should just snap in. If I carefully, he said, trying to do it with one hand. Right, see how it snaps into place? And it'll stay put when you solder it on the back, which is very handy. So we'll miss that one out, then that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. So you've got R1 and R2. R1 is 10 ohms, R2 is 220 ohms, and that's part of the MIDI out socket setup. Right, so that's that done. So we're getting there. Now the next thing is I've got to prepare a whole load of wires, ribbon cables, 2 from here, because we've changed the wiring of the screen, 1 from pin 38, and then a ribbon cable from all of these of different lengths, and I actually have a little board with the measurements of each on it, so I'll prepare all those and then solder all those in. This guide allows me to cut the various cables to the correct lengths, so I need to tin the ends now and then start soldering them in. The way I tend to do these is put them through like that and then run them over a bit of blue tack, flip it over, solder the backs and keep going. Now I've got a separate video on this because we're going to basically the reason these wires are in this order, which is 9, 10, 11, 13, 12 power out and ground, is because that's the order they were in on the screen. However, this is an example of the screen. Okay. However, we've changed the order, the way we wire up the screen slightly, which involves an extra wire soldered to pin 38. Pin 38 equivalent there. And the only way to stop yourself getting really confused, therefore, is to label each of these wires. So they're labelled, hang on, 9, 10, 11, 13, 12 VCC ground, same order as they are there. And then, by referring to this table, if you remember from the other video, we can wire up the screen in the new fashion. So the screen has 8 pins on it, but this wire run only has 7. That's because one of the pins on the screen is not used. What I'm doing now is tinning the pins of a female header, which I'm going to just plug into the screen. Makes life easier later on. Okay. So I've done that. The screen. So this is the Adafruit screen. It's got eight pins, and it comes in I2C mode, which is a way of talking to the computer being the Teensy board. So we're going to use SPI, which is a faster way of communicating, and the way you do that is you remove the quality control sticker from here, and you see these two pads. There's a little link there and there. You scratch them off with the tip of a pair of very sharp scissors like this. Now I've already done it here, and the other thing you do is I solder in a set of male pins, so I can then make a ribbon cable that just clips on here. So I'm going to do that now with one hand. I thought I was just going to impale my fingers then. There you go. So I'm now going to solder the ends of these ribbon cables to here, and each pin's labelled in the right order, which is not this order here. So they're going to be a bit twisted round. Okay, so data, the first pin is pin 11 on this numbering system. So that's pin 11, yeah. Then the next one along is CLK, which is 13. So this one should be 13, and yes, that one should be 13. That one's 13, and it is. Next one, DC, should be wire number 9. This one, and yeah, it is number 9 there. Next one, reset. Reset is our extra wire from pin 38, and I've soldered it to the back, but if I was to solder it to the Teensy directly on the top, it would be pin 38. It's the 6th pin in on this edge from this end, and so this flying lead is this one, yeah, and it does do that. And then the last one coming across of the data pins is CS, and that's pin 10. So we follow that wire, and yes, it's pin 10. Then this one is left blank. This one is VCC, which is here, 3. It's the power, 3.3 volts coming out on the ground. The end one goes to there, which it is. So I'm happy that that should work. This wire that I've just soldered on here is where there was once a spare push button on pin 40. And what we've done is we've repurposed that port. That will go to the accessory socket, and this pin will now read an analog voltage coming in. So that's why there's two wires soldered to where there was once a push button switch. That's ground, that's the pin that's going to measure the voltage in pin 40 from the accessory socket. So now you can see we've got all this spaghetti, but it's kind of ready to fit the PCB now into the Gurdy. So I'm going to disconnect that from the screen. Okay, so the next step is to bend all the wires so they're facing that way, and we drop the whole thing. It's best if you put it on your lap between your legs. Drop the whole thing in, down into there like that. Make sure everything falls through the bottom, goes out through the bottom. Okay, and now through these 6 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we're going to put M3 bolts with M3 nuts and a spacer that's 3D printed, that's about 6mm thick. and we're not going to do them up tight, we're going to do them up just kind of very finger tight. So as you put the keys through, it kind of aligns the PCB for you, if that makes sense, as the key stems all go through. So there you can see it's in with spacers. It's only done up finger tight. The PCB can actually move slightly. You can see it sticks out of the bottom like that. Now, so next thing to do is flip it over and start soldering on these wires to various things like this, the switch, and then that will leave you this, which will go to the screen, which is here. Okay, so here you go. We've got you've got 5 volt ground and pin here. 5 volt ground pin. The outer two are not connected to anything. Okay. Then you've got 3 wires here to the potentiometer. So the pin is the middle one. That's all that matters. So it varies as you turn the potentiometer. This goes to the chopper wheel sensor. These 3 there, and that leaves you this connector for the screen module, this here, which will fit that way like that. Okay, so we've got M2.5 bolts that go through the clear acrylic piece through the screen bolt holes, and we've got M2.5 nuts on the back, not done up tightly, just moderately tight. We don't want to crack the screen. To stop them undoing, we'll put a dab of glue on each one, and then we will plug in this to this. The glue on these is just drying, and meanwhile I've just assembled this. You can see there's 2 spacers. They're about 3mm thick. The bolts are M2.5, the same ones used for the tangents. They go straight through into the plastic, and these 2 will go straight into the wood there, and the chopper wheel will come around here and poke through this slot, but you can't see it from the top because you're still within the key box area. So we'll just put that to one side, or we'll use that later. The thing to do is undo this here and take this off, so that when you put the top on, the spindle goes through this hole here. So see, that's all plugged in. You'll notice that this wire, which is ground, comes around and goes to there, and that's the power. That pin has nothing attached to it because that's actually provided on the screen if you want to power something else off the screen, which we don't, and that's why there's a gap there. But that gap's good because it stops you plugging this on the wrong way around. It gives you a way of identifying which way around you need to be. I've tidied up the wiring. I've routed this like this, so that gets trapped in this groove here. So the next thing is to do a test fit. I've taken the top of this tuner peg off, so we'll do a test fit now before we start putting glue all over everything. There. We just check everything lines up right. It's a bit hard with one hand, so you can see that's gone in there. You can see that's not quite right yet. This needs to come across a little bit. Oops, there we are. Right, so test fit successful. Whoops. Test fit successful. Yeah, you see on this end it's all good. So the next thing to do is take the top off again, and then apply glue to here, here and here, not this part because there's no wood there, they're there, all along here, and then glue the two halves together and clamp them together. So there we go, all clamped up. Again, these are not Luthier's clamps, but they work just fine for this sort of thing. I've got loads of them and they all come off a well-known internet auction site. So we'll just leave that dry now for a little while. While we wait for this to dry, there's a few things we can be doing with 3D prints. One is to glue in the mountings for the magnets at each end here. That would be worth doing, so I'll do that next. I'm going to glue these two magnets into this hole and this hole. This one goes here, like that. And the reason it's such a weird shape is because there's going to be a lead coming up here which goes, bolts and projects through this hole, which the USB lead will fit into. So it's got to miss all that. This one fits here, like that. Right, they're glued in, they project through the bottom slightly, which is good because it means I can order whichever ones are most cost efficient. It doesn't matter if they're a bit longer. The main thing is that they're flush with the top here. Same with that one. So the geometry is right with respect to the lid. So the next thing is to glue these two parts into place. Right, so they're now glued and clamped and just waiting for them to set. You can see how this flat piece of this 3D print is designed to allow the clamp to fit exactly there and hold it in the right position. That's what it's there for. If you get bored waiting for this to dry, you can actually start fitting these as well. These are the tabs for the strap, so you get one there, and one the other end. And they can be fitted if you move the clamps around carefully with a screwdriver. So I've done those, one there, two there. I may just fit this into this hole as well and put on the cover plate. Okay, so that's in. You can see how that works. Okay, so that's in, and then the cable goes down, and then it loops around a couple of times because it's a bit longer than it needs to be, and then the end is plugged into the teensy board there. Okay. Next thing I've done is push the chopper wheel on so that it sits about halfway between these two dots, because they are the mounting points for the sensor. Okay. And now I'm going to mount the sensor, which we assembled earlier. I'm going to bolt it down into those two holes like that. That's why it's useful to have these long hex screwdrivers. It's just way easier than using the little L-shaped ones like this in the long run. Okay, so there it is, bolted in. You can see the wheel is in the middle of the sensor, two sensors. One shines an infrared light and the other one receives it. Right, and then this is plugged in. This is 3.3 volts. It's marked on the PCB. That's the wire that goes to this side, because it's marked on this little board, VCC, which is the power in. And then I think the middle one is the ground, yeah, and then the end one is the sensor, the one on the left. And so by making it plug in like that, it just makes everything easier to dismantle through the inspection hatch should you need to fiddle with anything or change anything. Once I've tested this, I'll put a dab of glue here to keep the wheel in place, but it is a friction fit. But until then, I'm going to just leave it as a push fit in case I have to take anything out again if it fails the initial test. So the next thing I'm going to do, because it's now mid-evening, is glue the far side on here, and then with a huge row of clamps on it, leave it overnight for the glue to set. Right, this type of glue pot has a line here that the glue comes out of, like a slot. So I'm just cleaning it up a bit. It's covered in crushed glue. Right, going to put a bead, if you like, of glue along here. And I've done this lots of times before. I used to use a cotton bud and a pot and pour the glue into a little pot, but I've actually got quite slick at doing it like that. You see there's a neat line there. I'll just do another one here. Nearly that. Right. You can see that. Now I get a cotton bud. I've got loads of cotton buds. I buy the vast numbers of them. And I'm going to add some glue at the ends here. Here. These are quite key parts. You'll see why in a minute. On there. This end. There. Just there. A bit missing there, sort of put a bit there. Right, then here. And here. Right, I've done that one. Okay, then we take our flexi panel. It's got millions of laser cuts, well not millions, a lot of small laser cuts in it which make it flexible. Now, just trust me, this is the order you need to do it. Don't start there, start with this smaller one here. Pick the best side, I think this side. Start with getting this on. Right, now the top pan and the bottom pan a little bit too close together for this to fit. Not to worry, come back here, you see it will fit. Then work your way forward, it just splays them apart a bit as you go. Right, that's on now. Now, how to get the end in neatly. Push it that way with your thumb. See what I've done there? And then work it in, get the ends in, then flatten it down and the ends push in. And tends, not completely, but to a large degree, stay in place. Right, now we concentrate on this part. Again, you've got to line that up. Actually, that's a good fit. That's gone on well. And do the same this end. So we're going to push it so it bows up a bit. Get these corners in here, that's the crucial bit. Then force it all down. And as glue squirts out, just wipe it away. Now you see it's bowed a bit there, so we're going to need to clamp that while it's setting, while the glue's setting. So what do I have? I you can clamp it to the bench. You can put it down like that and have clamp, 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 clamp all along. I tend to use this, which I made for the job, and it's Digi-Gurdy shaped. Right, I'll just start clamping, and I use an enormous number of these things basically, and I also use little bits of spare wood to spread the load so it doesn't block the surface. So I start here and just get one on here, because this is wanting to pop out, so we'll start there. Okay, and work my way along. I don't know why I'm going such in a hurry. It sets quickly, but not that quickly. It's not like super glue. So before I put each clamp on, I make sure the panel's pushed in. So I put it on very gently and then just give it a good push into place, then put it on a little bit harder. Bit of push. Nice. Now, this is the key area. You see it's bowing out here, so let's sort that out. Push that in. Bowing out here and here as well. Get even more clamps. So I'm just wiping the glue away as I go. Right, if we can get one in here, it's just bulging a bit there. Okay, that's pretty good. Just put one there, I think. And then finally for this end I've got two rather large clamps. I'm actually going to clamp this to the bench, otherwise the whole thing's going to fall off. So actually I'm just going to cheat a bit and do that. Right, you see the glue squirting out there? And then we've got one more, so I might as well do the same with that. Fall off? No. Right, so there you have it. Get some light on things. If there's any glue, just wipe it off. Now at the end I'm going to sand these edges down, these bits that stick out, so it looks nicer. One pet hate of mine are things that are held on by magnets, and the magnets are just self-adhesive. You see it on doors of 3D printers and things sometimes. The glue always comes undone in the end. It's just really annoying, which is why these magnets are a tight fit in these holes, and I've glued them in just for good measure. Now on the lid side we've got this panel which needs, oh actually it fits perfectly, makes a change. It's got bolt heads here and here. They're not glued on. I actually ran a thread cutter. I had a hole here and a hole here, and I actually ran I've got it here, a thread cutter, you see, a tap, 8mm, through each hole to cut a thread into the wood, and I then threaded a bolt through and then cut it short. I've got some here that I've made in the workshop, and they're basically bolts that have been cut down. So there's only a couple of turns of thread, admittedly, but they thread in and there's glue on the threads, and it means these bolts shouldn't pull out and these magnets shouldn't pull out either, so you have a reliable system. So you might be looking at that lid now and thinking, well, that's rather ugly, because you can see these, and it is. So that's why there's another piece now which is glued like that to the top of the lid, so they come off as a pair like that, and it all looks lovely. So I'm going to glue this to this. You'll see I've filed these front two slots are perfect the way they've been laser cut. These rear two, I've filed them very slightly just to make the lid snap on. So you put the front of the Gurdies towards me and it should just snap down into place. So that's good. Right, so there they are, clamped together, and I'm going to leave that overnight. I put something heavy on here as well, and I'll leave this overnight as well. So it's the next morning. I've removed the clamps, and that's all looking good on the one side. So we still have one side open and got the base hatches open, so still access for things. Next thing is trial fit the lid. So we'll take the heavy book off. If you remember, I said I was going to use. Okay, here's the lid, having me 4 clamps and heavy book. Get rid of those. Just check that fits nice, it's not warped or twisted, which is always good. Oops, drop it on the floor. That's a good start. You'll notice one of these bolts is nearer the end than the other side. That's partly because this slopes, partly because there's things going on in here, and we don't want to foul the key stem, this key stem, with the magnet mechanism. So basically the one that's nearest the end is this end, so we'll just check it does actually fit the lid, and it goes down with a satisfying click. There we are. Good. So the next thing is to fit the crank handle, load it up with software and check it works before we put the keys in. So you can check it works by pressing the actual micro switches with your fingers instead of the keys. Just check that it works, check the screen actually lights up and you haven't wired one of those many wires up the wrong way. Check that this works with a something like this plugged into it, a MIDI transmitter. Check the buzz potentiometer is working, and if all that looks good, then we put the keys in and we put the side on, the remaining side. So for the crank we need the following parts: the long bolt, 2 bearings, small bearings, knob itself, 3D printed, spacer, which is important, 3D printed, a regular, I think it's M5 nut, and a nylock M5 nut. By nylock I mean it's got a special nylon liner which grips the thread so it won't rattle loose. It's designed not to do that. Right, so I've done that nut up moderately tight. The bearings still move freely, the plastic, if you do it incredibly tight, the plastic gets forced into the side of the bearing and you find that it doesn't rotate anymore. So it's done up moderately tight. Okay, so I've pushed it through there. Now what you need to do is hold this nut still and tighten this one, because you don't want this nut to start tightening itself up against the bearings and the spacer and crushing the spacer into the sides of the bearings. So I actually use 3mm hex, like that, and I hold that like that, and I hold it still, so the only thing that can rotate is this nut. And I use a, one of these, it's like basically a ratchet spanner, ratchet with a ratchet socket driver. So I turn this nut and I hold everything else still, so the nut just tightens up against that, and this nut doesn't tighten at all relative to the bolt, because it's moderately tight at the moment and we need it to keep it that way when it comes to this direction. So we tighten this nut against it until it grips the handle. So there it is, all tightened up. The bearings still spin nicely. So the next thing to do is just check this is clean inside. Basically this is a push fit onto these two bearings, but it's fairly tight. So you basically would put your hand like that, and the same with your other hand, and just wiggle it around like this until it starts to slide on. I'll try and, I don't think I can film that. Still spins. It frees up with time and use actually. So we're almost ready now to load the software onto this and just do a quick software test. Before I do that, I'm going to drill a hole here 8mm in diameter. And I'm not just going to attack it with an 8mm diameter drill. I start small. Whoops. And then we'll go up in size till we get to 8mm. Fragments. The smaller fragments, push them into the hole, bend them over. Like that. I'll tell you why in a minute. Then we need the accessory socket, and we need to remove the nut from it. Like that. Then push it into the hole. It's got a thread here which is for the nut. And partly, hang on, it's not quite straight. Let's start again. Line it up. You can basically screw it in. And what I do is I grip it. I grip it with these forceps like that. And I slowly screw it in. And those fragments that I pushed into the hole help form that kind of grip somehow against the thread, and it will, with patience and care, screw in to the extent that you don't need to splurge it with glue on the back. If we now turn this over, we've got this wire that we connected to the switch solder point number 41, pin 41, and if you remember, the pin on the lower side, which is now this edge of the PCB, was ground, and the one above it was pin 41, which is going to read the voltage coming in through our accessory socket. So with a Sharpie I drew a black line on the ground wire to remind me which is which. The ground wire goes to this terminal, the long one, and then the other wire goes to the little terminal there. So that's now soldered on, so that's ground and that's the wire to the pin 41 I think it was. I'm just showing you everything now assembled. Chopper wheel in the middle there, brake drum, tensioning system, nice crank knob. Notice this sticks out just far enough so this doesn't bash into these. Okay. So now we really are ready to do a software test. Okay, the software's loaded. Okay, the screen's come on, and when I crank I get notes and the buzz indicator flashes, so that's good. Just check autoplay, just check all the keys work going along the micro switches. See, we get a note, none of them are dead or anything. That's good. So the next thing we can do is put the keys in, do a final check, then put the side on. So the next thing I'm going to do is put the keys in. Now I know all the micro switches do work. So we'll start with the bottom row. They're numbered, so it's engraved into each one. Unfortunately the top ones also have the same numbering, but the style, if you like, is different. Now these will fit into the slots without any filing. The slots in the PCB are slightly larger than these slots. So the idea is the PCB can be fraction of a millimeter off center and still not rub the shafts of the keys. But what I found is, and I mentioned this earlier in the video, is by leaving these bolts slightly loose, by the time you've got all the keys in, they by themselves kind of line up the PCB largely, and then you tighten up the bolts. That's what I found works. What I do is I wax the keys just to make them run more smoothly. And what I do is, if you can see here, I literally get an old candle, just the sort you have in case of a power cut. I literally just rub the key like crazy, especially the corners, and I rub the wax into the wood. And then I just flick off the excess, and then I put the key into its slot. So when you get your Gurdy, you may see little flakes of wax, like there's a few here on it. That's what it is, it's just wax. So I'll do that for all the keys. And what I've just found on my prototype is the more you play it, the more smoothly the keys run. It's almost as if the wax rearranges itself a bit as you play. But it seems to work for me. I've seen other people use special types of wood polish, and you may have your own favourite way to do it, but for me wax seems to work. These last three keys, you put them in a different order. You put that one in, then that one, that and that one, because of the shape of the keys, you see. Also notice these two go into one large rectangular slot. I thought there was a mistake or something to begin with, because I'd got one fewer slots than keys, but you'll find they go through the same slot. So here's the upper keys ready to go in. Be aware, you don't have to put the tangents onto these lower keys before you fit the top keys. All the tangents can be done at the end, because this has been designed using brain cells to make sure that that's possible. I did have a design once where the lower keys micro switches were on the underside of the keys, but that would of course been a complete pain to put together and put the tangents on. This way everything's done from the top. If you want to extract the keys for some reason, all the tangents can be removed from the top and then all the keys can be pulled out. And that's why the top lid is naturally glued on, just in case you ever did need to get in there and change a key or mend a key or anything like that. Okay, they're all in. Just remember, don't tip the Gurdy forwards, otherwise they'll all just fall out into your lap. So the next thing now is these top keys are double thickness, if you remember. So what I suggest to get, so you get the right ones in the right place, is temporarily just rest them like this on top of their respective keys, and then you know you've got the right ones of the correct width in the right place. Put glue on here with a cotton bud very sparingly, otherwise it squishes out the sides like a cream cake. And then with the number downwards, unless you want to see the numbers, you glue it, you put it there and you push down, and you push the key all the way in to do it. So you use the front of the key box as your guide to keep it lined up. So all you have to do is line it up left and right, if you like, not forward back, plain, and just leave it and then go on to the next one. So I'll just show you one of those. So I'm just going to open my glue tub, get some cotton buds. Right, so this is number one here. So I'm literally just going to put a tiny bit of glue on. Just, I mean, that's plenty. And then with a cotton bud, if you can see that, I just move it around. I rotate the cotton bud as I do it, otherwise it unravels and the cotton comes off. You see, that's like pretty sparing. That's deliberate. And then I stick it down. Try and get it as perfect as possible. As I say, if you push the key all the way into the front deck, it helps. Just feel that edge, helps line it up. Okay, so they're all glued, and we don't have glue squirting out of the middle of each of them like a cream cake. Just in case any glues move back onto the front of the Gurdy, we don't want the key to be stuck in that position. So what I do is I move them all out just a tiny bit like that. Right, and now I just leave them for a while to set, because before we put the tangents on there's one more step, and that is to file these edges, just round them off slightly, these top edges of these top keys, which means taking them out individually, doing it, putting them back in. Okay, the next thing I need to do is with this, file down the ends of these keys. So if I take one out, there's a knack to this, but I have done it before. If you haven't done it before, I'd suggest using doing it by hand with a sanding block, to be honest. Right, so in the printer are some tangents, which is the last step. Right, now I'm going to fit the tangents into all these little pairs of holes. Tangents do two jobs. They push the micro switch, but they also stop the key moving too far that way and falling out. So they come in two broad sizes, narrow and identical, but just a little bit fatter. So you get a few of each on each set of prints, and also they have a tab in the middle, and that's useful because you can pick it up with a pair of these forceps, move it around, put the bolts in, put it down into place, and then screw it down with an electric screwdriver. Not all the way, just nearly all the way in, and then you finally tighten them with the 2mm manual screwdriver. And you're going to need loads and loads of these 10mm long M2.5 bolts with hex heads. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So we'll start with the difficult ones this end first. So you pick it up with the forceps, you put a bolt in the back, you put a bolt in the front hole, and you hold it, you push the keys forward a touch, you hold it over the hole that you want, like that. There's one final step, and that's to file these down, and the same this end. Normally I do it after I've fitted the final panel along this side. Hang on. Normally I would do it after I'd fitted this final panel, but just to show you how I do it, I'm going to just file these and these. Here we go. That's much nicer. Oops, hang on. So is that in there? So we'll do another final electronic test, tidy up the wires, put this side on in the same way that we put this side on, and then finally put in the access panels with tiny little screws in each of these pre-drilled holes, and then it will be finished. There's one more thing. There's a cover which goes on here, 3D printed. You see there's two holes? Basically you put a bolt through, again it's an M2.5 bolt through each of these two holes without over tightening it into the 3D printed cover, which will sit on there, and that then completes the build. It's the next morning and this is the other side glued into place, so start taking off the clamps, chuck them on the ground, there we are, take this off, right, so both sides are on now. So what remains to be done? Well, put the top cover on, but not just yet. First of all, we need to put that on as well. First of all, put these little panels in. Oh, I need to put a bit of glue on there as well, but you can see these panels going nice here, and the screws I use are absolutely tiny. I don't know what these are. I think these are 2.5 mil. And the interesting thing of these is the heads just go into these holes just enough so that when you put the whole thing on the table, the heads of the screws don't scratch the surface of your table. They embed themselves just slightly without needing to countersink the holes, which saves you a little bit of time. And then a nice little touch, if you've saved the quality control sticker from your Adafruit screen, you can stick it on here. There you are, and it's had a complete quality control inspection at the end there. Joking aside though, I do that. The final step is to run the whole thing and test every single function of it, just check everything is still working. And of course I need to just file these with my sander because I haven't done those yet. So there it is, nearly ready to go. I'm just waiting for the printer to finish printing that cover. A bolt comes up through there and through there, which can be reached from below, and I just need to sand these, and then we're all done.